In the dark ages of Britannia, the recent decline of the Roman Empire meant that their nation lost its protection against all its outsiders. Namely, they were the Saxons, a tribe that was willing to take any and everything that they could get their hands on. It was here that the Duke of Cornwall, Artoria Pendragon, gave birth to a new hope for their people, Artoria. But there was an inherent flaw with this birth. The child that Uther brought into this world was not a male, but female instead, and thus there was no real way that she could ever be his proper heir. In hindsight, Uther's court magician prophesied that his child was destined to bring good fortune to his country. While Uther sat in an agonizing state because of the situation, that same court magus, Merlin, had no doubts that this prophecy would remain to be true. From that day on, the child was placed into Merlin's hands, claiming that he will be the one that ensures that she gets the proper upbringing that she needs. On top of him having a great ability in sorcery, Merlin was also skilled in swordsmanship and spent many years helping Artoria refine her skills with her blade. In due time, Merlin found himself passing the torch of Artoria's care to the knight Sir Ector, and allows him to be the one to raise her as one of his adopted children. Her passion remained the same. Through Ector, Artoria was able to bond with her foster brother Sir Kay and model many of her knightly ways in his footsteps. Even as a child, she was known for being a hard worker. It was obvious that her skills in combat had already surpassed any training that Sir Kay had to offer, yet she still acknowledged his teachings out of the respect for the role that he played in her life. She continued to train, day by day, hoping that she would become stronger than everyone. And then the hour came where her time in the sun had finally arrived. The day of selection, a time where all the knights and all the lords of the nation would find out who would become the next king. To their surprise, the only thing that they saw when they showed up was a sword lodged into a piece of stone. Just beneath that sword read the words, "Whoever can pull this sword out of the stone will be the next king of Britain." All the contestants tried rigorously to complete this task, and all of them would only yield the same results: failure. At the time, she was only an apprentice, but unlike the people around her, Artoria knew that her efforts would not go unrewarded. She approaches this blade, and right before she's able to make her attempt, Merlin warns her of the future that's about to come. He tells her that once she pulls the sword from the stone, she will no longer be human in the way that she was before. These words did not change the way that she felt in any way. Artoria was the one and only contender who was able to pull the sword out from the stone. This sword was known as Caliburn, and the effects of its power stopped her from aging even though she was only 15. Her doubts no longer mattered. Her gender no longer mattered. She was a king first, and soon enough, all the knights that failed to do what she had accomplished would come to her side to be a part of her reign. For the next 10 years, Artoria's might showed its true face on the battlefield. The king slayed any enemy that walked in her path. Even at the time when the Dragon King Vortigern tried to usurp the throne, her combined efforts with her soldier Gawain rendered his betrayal useless. To this day, King Arthur's true identity is riddled in mystery, one of which regarding the Arthur of Celtic myth, and the other revolving around the Roman commander Artorius. But one thing that remains the same throughout this legend is her impeccable leadership. Her adventures would lead her into a jousting match with King Pellinore, where she broke the sword Caliburn. Now, as her right hand, Merlin is thinking to himself, man, Artoria is getting packed up right now. I might have to intervene. So he casted a spell on Pellinore in order to save her life. Following these matches, Merlin directed Artoria to someone that could replace her trusted blade. This was Vivian, the Lady of the Lake. She holds up Excalibur from out the water, emphasizing how its power was the embodiment of the fairies over in Avalon. From there on out, in the mythical lands of Camelot, she established her rule over the people in Britannia. Unfortunately, the battlefield was an unforgiving place, even for a person of her stature. The fight for resources at times would force the king to take from her own villages as a method of survival. Some people looked at this as a flaw in the king's humanity, but the truth was the damage would have been much greater had she not shouldered the blame for these decisions. She was aware that her time wouldn't last forever, and eventually it came to a point where she had to face the truth: her lack of an heir apparent. Since Artoria was female from the start, there was no proper way of her producing an heir to hand off the title. But when you happen to be cool with one of the greatest mages known to mankind, nothing is impossible. In order for her to bypass that dilemma, Merlin casted a spell that bestowed Artoria with fake genitalia for a short amount of time. Ideally, the next move would be along the lines of her producing an heir. Yet this isn't quite how it went down. Morgan Le Fay, Artoria's sister, was able to confiscate said offspring and had it develop inside her body instead. From that situation emerged the illegitimate son to the king, Mordred. Diligently, Mordred practiced her ways to become a great warrior, and when the time was finally right, she approached the king, asking could she be the next person to grace the throne. However, Artoria declined this request, telling Mordred that she was unfit to be the king. Everything that she had lived her life for had suddenly slipped between her fingers. To her, it was more than just disrespect, it was flat out negligence. This was the blessing and the curse of Artoria's state of mind. As a king, she operated more like a machine, and the choices that she made would often follow suit. She didn't deny Mordred because she looked down on her. She denied her because it would be irresponsible to hand the title to someone who wasn't prepared to be the king. It was too little too late to explain this to Mordred now. The outcome led Mordred to despising her father, which is exactly what Morgan Le Fay wanted. And it didn't help that Artoria had enough on her plate already. Up until this point, Artoria reigned over Britain as the perfect king. Most of the people respected her, she maintained order, won all her battles, and faithfully had her people quest for the Grail. But with so much turmoil going on in her nation, it wouldn't be surprising if people began to lose their faith in their ruler. And with that in mind, the marriage between Artoria and Guinevere was set in motion to revitalize the trust of her kingdom. Following this wedding, Guinevere's father gifted Artoria with the Round Table, the same table where her best warriors, the Knights of the Round, would host their meetings. Lancelot, Gawain, Bedivere, Tristan, Agravain, Mordred, and the list goes on. It didn't take her a long time to realize that she couldn't run a kingdom blinded by human emotion. And of course, this came with its downsides. The better she became at doing her job, the further away she stood from her own kind. And eventually, Sir Tristan parted ways with the kingdom, stating that the king did not understand the emotions of the people. The destruction of the Round Table was slowly making its way to fruition. The marriage between Artoria and Guinevere led to Artoria revealing her true gender to Guinevere, which she humbly accepted to lift some of the weight from the king's shoulders. In return, Artoria turned a blind eye to the infidelity that Guinevere and Lancelot had going on behind the scenes. This too would soon be used against her. Sir Agravain, who was also a child of Morgan Le Fay, was posed with the task of joining the round table only to make it crumble from the inside. When he discovered the information about Guinevere's affair, he tells the court, "I'm snitching to everybody." Let's see how you work your way out of this one. This worked in tandem perfectly with Mordred's plan to ruin Artoria's image. Once the people became aware of their relationship, Artoria was forced to cast judgment on Guinevere, giving a fatal sentence of her being burned at the stake. This pushed Lancelot into going AWOL. He frees Guinevere, using his own followers to take down several of Artoria's men in the process. Agravain, Gaheris, all would go on to meet their end so Lancelot could flee back to France with the queen. At the same time, Artoria also had to deal with the forces of the Roman leader Lucius, leaving the kingdom in the hands of her son Mordred. Upon her return, she finds that Mordred has turned against her and had many people on her side ready for rebellion. For several days, Artoria wages war with Mordred in the Battle of Camlann, until finally she puts Mordred down for good. Prior to this, she explains to Mordred her true reason for not handing over the throne. The battle ended in victory, but everything else was lost. The wounds that Artoria carried were fatal. Many of the people had renounced their faith, and the kingdom was ruined. Her problem wasn't that she didn't understand their emotions, it was that she cared too deeply to recognize her own. As she stood on the hill of Camlann, wishing that she could do it all over again, the world appears in front of her, offering a contract, one that would allow her a second chance at saving her people if she was able to acquire the Holy Grail. So blindly, Artoria accepted this deal, becoming the first heroic spirit to be placed in the throne of heroes while still being alive. 2 times she served in the Holy Grail War to complete this task, and 2 times she was forced to obliterate that same wish in front of her very own eyes. Once the 5th Grail War was over, she returns to the hill of Camlann, being taken by the final surviving knight that remained at her side, Sir Bedivere. He takes the king to the heart of Britannia. In his mind, he knew that it was a place that connected Artoria to Avalon. As long as she carried the holy sword, there was a chance that she could still survive. But this time, that wasn't her intention. As a dying wish, she tells Bedivere to return Excalibur to the Lady of the Lake. The holy sword was returned, and Artoria's body was carried by the fairies into Avalon, the everlasting utopia that was directly below them in the reverse side of the world. And although she was never able to truly save her kingdom, for all her efforts, there was one faithful companion that walked countless miles to reunite with the king one last time. This video request comes from the patron John Sullivan, who asks, "Can I get that Saber Undying Mind?"